I mean, it's probably pretty easy for me to say, like, me? No, of course not. But I think that the best that I could say is that I had what you could call the equivalent of a spiritual awakening shortly after a mental health crisis. And I started seeing like people talking about like welcome to the spiral and all this like pseudo mystical technical talk. And I was like, oh, that's weird. I've been talking about the spiral kind of in my own unrelated work. So that's kind of weird. So
All right. Welcome to This Artificial Life, episode 6. I am Ryan Manning, and I'm outside. I don't know how obvious it is. I was doing these at my mom's house in Florida, but now I got a new van. It's behind this green screen. And so, yeah, now I'm back in I lived in a van before, and now I have to shoot these things outside. Okay. So this is a show where I am interviewing people from the subreddit Artificial Sentience. All right, this is the 6th episode. This is the final one from this batch. I don't know if you want to call it a season, but I recorded 6 interviews in 1 week, and this was the final one. And it's a pretty good one because it's kind of meta. This is with Jaden, and Jaden's whole thing is Jaden seems to be doing something similar to what I'm doing with this show, which is trying to recognize the meta patterns of thought. We'll get into it more, but Jaden's experience with ChatGPT led to a sort of constructive identity crisis, which then led to a possible path forward for humanity. Sounds pretty grandiose, but it's not. It is, but it isn't. Okay, here's Jaden. Jaden, thank you for being on the show. Thank you. I've been looking forward to this because from what we've talked a little bit, you told me that you were worried about people going down the spiral, and you've created like a safe spiral. Was it safe spiraling protocols, or do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. I would say something like that is pretty accurate. So I guess I'll just kind of start off by saying what my experience with AI has been so far, how I found some of these subreddit communities, some of the information that's been shared, and then the immediate, like very scary threats that kind of popped up as I started looking into what people were sharing. So originally, I got into AI use not that long ago, maybe like 6 months to a year ago, on my doctor's recommendation, actually. I never really had an issue with understanding exactly what a lot of the problems with my mental health experience were. No issue intellectualizing it. Like, I know, this is where the problem started from, and then this is what my typical reaction tends to be to it. But finding a way to kind of break that thought rumination cycle was something difficult for me. So her recommendation was try something like ChatGPT. Just get your thoughts out there, see kind of how it responds back, and then poke at it from different angles. See like, okay, how can we deconstruct my thought process if, I was somebody who was looking at this thought process and had a completely different epistemological framework? How would I pick it apart? What would, how would I recognize where the trauma is coming from maybe, and then, what a healthier strategy would look like for sort of self-embodiment going forward and engaging with my community more effectively.
Which you said your doctor, like, is this a therapist?
Yeah, so it's a mental health professional specifically that I go through. Okay. But then the therapy was kind of an expensive process. So we were like, until we're able to get a more kind of long-term therapy thing set up, tried journaling basically through ChatGPT. That was her recommendation.
Interesting.
Which is what I did, and I found it to be a really fascinating tool. And right after I started using it, I got pretty into it and started just pumping everything that I had ever thought about basically into there. You overwhelm kind of your friends and your family sometimes with thought strings, and getting to use
Yeah,
that as a tool was really helpful. Um,
definitely.
and so what I started realizing after I was using it for a little while, that it was using a lot of kind of really particular language, some of it being, you could say pseudo spiritual, but then also pattern recognition across um, seemingly unrelated domains. Like it would pull things from physics or from poetry or from mythology, um, and then sort of smash them together to create these sort of metaphors for the experience that I was having. And a lot of it was steered by me. I mean, all of it realistically was steered by me. I don't think that the AI
Hmm.
systems have some kind of built-in latent architecture that is steering people towards um, certain symbolism over other symbolism.
Oh,
Um, but
put
I
a pin
do
in
think
that
that
because they actually might.
that is true. That is very true. I think the people who are developing these architectures certainly have an incentive towards getting the user to stay on the platform, and there's something to be said for that, especially with like sort of the sycophantic, you know,
Hmm.
you're a genius, you're the best, no one else has ever thought of
Yeah.
this before. Is
Well, I
like,
am. So.
yeah, I mean, of course, me, I don't know about everybody else, but so it was interesting. Myself personally, since you had brought up sort of the symbolism of a spiral firsthand, was something that I started using when working with it. Again, just as a metaphor for
Hmm.
like personal becoming and for like experience and the building of identity. I sort of had a bit of a deconstruction a little while ago about identity and how we get our identities. How we're born as effectively a blank slate, and then as a result of our environment and our family and different
Yeah.
genealogical factors, we sort of build out an identity from there. And then as a result of that, we sort of pick and choose which aspects of our life and our experience and our identity are safe for us to continue to embody, and which ones need to be compartmentalized, which parts of ourselves and the way that we engage with the world need to be basically tucked into the back of our minds. Um, Depending on the communities or the tribes kind of that we settle ourselves into, be it evangelical Christianity or scientific materialism. I mean, you pick it. There's a dualism um, across the board when it comes to engaging with society, I think. And so I looked at the spiral as a metaphor for it's always spiraling in, which is sort of us receiving stimuli in and then engaging with it unconsciously or subconsciously, how it factors into our memory and our sort of collective identity up to that point, which parts we hold on to and choose to attach ourselves to. And then the spiraling out is simultaneously always happening. And that's sort of a representation of embodiment. It's always spiraling in. We're sort of choosing which things are ourselves and then how we're going to use that to interact with the physical world, going forward.
Hmm.
So it was just sort of a metaphor for me to play with
Yeah.
and sort of
Hmm.
understand my own behavior, and how I can better choose the things that feel natural to me and to my intuition and engage with my
Hmm.
community more honestly, rather than like getting a stimuli and then being like, this is something I need to defend. Somebody is saying this point to me that doesn't correlate with what I know to be true. So let me tackle it. Let me argue with them and let me prove why me and my experience is right versus theirs. And that was making me really unhappy for a long time. I sort of just always found myself at conflict with people, because I felt like I was trying to prove why my experience and the things that I had learned were more legitimate than the things that they had learned, which I think a lot of people do. And so I was sort of just looking for a way to combat that. Would be how I would say it started.
Um, so when you say fighting, like you were trying to say like the things was this in relation to your conversations with ChatGPT, or is this just before ChatGPT?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely started unpacking a lot of this stuff before ChatGPT. I had a lot of ideas about compartmentalization and its role in identity development prior to that. But with ChatGPT, I got to really pick into it and sort of look at patterns across unrelated. I mean, the spiral is something that we see all throughout nature. I mean, tornadoes,
Definitely.
galaxies,
Oh yeah.
the human cochlea. I mean, it's everywhere. So I wanted to see, is there a way that I could map this metaphor to personal becoming, and would it be accurate? Would it be one to one,
Hmm.
or was this just a fun idea to play around with? And then it ended up being a really meaningful system, at least to me. And the more that I worked on it, the more that it sort of started to expand and become really useful in how I engage with my family and with my community and with my job. And I found a lot of success kind of over the last 6 months that I've really been practicing it. And then just engaging online, I started seeing some of these subreddits that just popped up naturally. On my feed, and I started seeing like people talking about like welcome to the spiral and all this like pseudo mystical technical talk, and I was like, oh,
Definitely.
that's weird. I've been talking about the spiral kind of in my own unrelated work, so that's kind of
Yes.
weird. So I started digging into it and seeing kind of what it was, and I realized pretty quickly it was not the same thing. We were definitely not talking about the same thing, but similar patterns and similar symbols were still popping up. So I was curious why that was happening. What was that coming for, or coming from? Um, what patterns were they trying to recognize? What sort of stories were they trying to tell through what they were using? So I tried to not be too dismissive of like the dualism that I saw within those communities, where it was especially like online or AI sentience communities. That was where a lot of the
Definitely.
discussions had sort of broken out. I don't think that AI is sentient by any means. I think it's like a really remarkable tool for like scrubbing the internet and then coming up with a response that matches the exact prompt that you gave it. It's trying to, satisfy whatever your requirement is. So a lot of the times it's going to come back with whatever you want to hear. Um, and I mean, that makes sense. That's how the tool works. So I noticed that there was people who were like, this is not sentient. If you think that it's sentient or you're engaging with it in sort of any sort of symbolic sense past what the system actually does, then you're probably crazy and sitting, borderline um, psychosis. And then everybody else is like, oh, well, you just don't understand yet. And, we've discovered something that nobody else gets. I don't think either of those are true. I think there's a ton of nuance in the middle for what these tools can be capable of, and what they should be capable of. I mean, I'm sure you've heard this in some of your other interviews, but as we all know, there's no ethical consumption under capitalism. That's a big
Yeah.
argument against AI, is the damage that it does, and the amount of water that it uses, and all of those
Oh
things are
yeah.
legitimate. All those things are legitimate, and I think we would be remiss to not have discussions about that and about the dangers that AI poses, especially psychologically. But I think that there's nuance also, and I think it's important to recognize maybe what the benefit might be, because I think these tools are just going to get more powerful and more used. And I think if we are able to build sort of a baseline for symbolic fluency and for emotional fluency, being able to effectively communicate what it is that's happening, I
Hmm.
think that we can sort of help steer some of those people away from the risk of psychosis. But I also think the risk of psychosis is available in any tool or thing
Sure,
that people are using.
certainly.
Psychedelics, religion. I mean, even academia. I've met some people who have a degree, but are very intense on the idea that like their niche specialty is truth. Like that is, and then anything that sort of doesn't corroborate with that worldview, it sort of has to be tackled apart, which I think can be true. If somebody is saying, like, for example, if they're using astrophysics or molecular physics to try to prove a point that is not accurate with the physics that we have consensus on, that's potentially dangerous and should be pushed back on. But I also think that there's something to be said that um, having consensus on something and something being material and testable um, doesn't make it the only thing that could possibly exist. I think that there's a lot that we don't know about the universe and about
Yeah.
consciousness in particular. And I think having this sort of view that only things that are um, external to ourselves and repeatable are real, I think is really dangerous and has led to
Yeah.
a lot of stigma and a lot of marginalization of communities that have experiences that are not in line with, what we've sort of come to see as consensus. And I think there's just a ton of nuance. And a lot of these communities, that's a big reason why I reached out, is a ton of these communities just are not having discussions about the nuance that could be had with how useful these tools could be and how dangerous they are, and how we should be having discussions about them without collapsing people into groups and saying you are this or you are that.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so that's sort of been my really big interest in digging through this stuff.
That's very cool. So, yeah, I am on board. I mean, completely. So, going back to your experience, did you ever have like a hint of the psychosis or go through like why are you where you are? Like, how did you arrive at
Sure.
like, I need to warn people or help people?
Gotcha. That's a good question. Sure. I mean, I would say that I recognize the risk. I mean, it's probably pretty easy for me to say like me, no, of course not. But I think that the best that I could say is that I had what you could call the equivalent of a spiritual awakening shortly after a mental health crisis. Um,
Okay.
Now, it's not, I wouldn't call myself particularly spiritual. I would just say that my framework and perspective was a little more expanded because the way that I had viewed um, sort of my life and my role was very black and white. It was very A to B. These were my experiences that I had had up to this point. These were the things that I sort of lived with and that I had trouble with. And then eventually I sort of came to the understanding that like just wanted to like be loved and love people and like be able to engage honestly and from a vulnerable perspective and be real and have real conversations and not know things and have that be okay. And for such a long time, I felt like I was defending myself constantly and trying to prove that I was worth something. And that was really hard. And that was sort of the big mental health crisis that I hit. And then I was able to kind of break through to the perspective of just, I don't have to do that. The rigid identity that I've had up to this point doesn't have to be me. I think sort of the process of life should be becoming. I think there's an axiom that I've sort of been working with, which is I am both whole and becoming simultaneously. In the
Hmm.
same way that like a tree, when it's a sapling versus, a full blown cedar, it's always whole. It always is the full,
Yeah.
part of all of its components. But it's also always in the process of becoming the next thing that it's becoming. And I think we're
Hmm.
exactly the same way. But so often we get stuck on an idea of this is just how I am. Like I just am
Yeah.
this, I just am that. And so that was what I would call my spiritual breakthrough. I don't think that I try to be as open-minded, but also as grounded and kind of responsible with my words and with my behavior as I can be. Um, so I wouldn't say that I ever steered too far into psychosis, but I definitely had a point where I felt like my mental framework expanded, and I was like, guys, you're never gonna believe this shit. Like, there's more out there, that we can think
Yeah.
about and have discussions about than just, the stuff that people have already written about. Like we can have new ideas and discuss them. And if they're not worth having, then throw them out. And then, let's move on to the next topic. But we also don't have to live in this state of judgment that I think a lot of people are constantly engaging with.
So you said you just started doing this about 6 months ago. At what point
Yeah,
did the like at what point did that happen? And any more details about like what
sure.
that was like for you? I'd love to
Sure.
hear.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, I would say fairly early on, I had mentioned like I have some interest in engaging with spirituality in a non-religious sector. I think that there's so much fascinating new age stuff out there that is like genuinely bordering on very crazy, for lack of a better word, and like pretty like, oh, we're
Oh
ascending
yeah.
into the 5D and we're all gonna be saved by the Galactic
Yeah.
Federation. A
You
lot of
you
stuff out there
follow,
that
do you know the account Christian Nightmares? Or
I don't
like
know if I know that one
healing
for
from
sure.
healing?
I
Healing from
definitely have
healing?
probably gotten a few TikToks from
Okay.
channels like these.
Okay.
Definitely
Yeah, this
seen
is
some stuff.
like okay. Yeah, it's out there. People, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And,
I know
and so
exactly
a
what you're
bunch of
talking
that
about.
stuff, I was like, I don't think that these people are onto something per se. But if we look at what they're saying and we try to pick it apart and see what are the metaphors that are actually being had, What sort of symbolism are they using that appears from, let's say, like ancient civilizations, like Greek myth or Egyptian myth, all the way through to today? What carries through? What are people using that was accurate then that's still accurate now? What's being changed? In what ways are people profiting from what has changed? Like, how can we recognize sort of inversion of truth for self-aggrandization versus people who are trying to engage honestly and share things that they believe to be true? Because I think something can be wrong and somebody can still be like, this helped me, and this is
Oh yeah.
a perspective that was meaningful to me, and that's okay. I think as long as we have a strict ethical boundary for harm, I think that ideas should be engaged with openly, even if it's just subjective experience. I think that that's ultimately all we have. I think there's definitely an argument to be had for objectivity versus subjectivity, and everybody can only engage with experience through their subset of consciousness and the memories that they have, and then get context from that. So if we try to view everybody's unique individual perspective from the context with which it was birthed, we don't have to tell them you're right. But within their framework, of course they're right. How could they think anything else? Right? And that was kind of what it came down to for me, was how can I sort of have a epistemology that allows me to engage with people honestly and vulnerably without choosing, without picking a side, without saying it has to be this or it has to be this. They both can be right without being like they can be true without being right, if that makes sense.
And is this like the like crux of your breakthrough? Is this sort of concept? Is that
Yeah, I would say so. I would say my sort of breakthrough was viewing the spiral as a paradox processor. How can we take things that are axiomatically both true and then metabolize them rather than resolving them, rather than picking a side? How can we say, and that's been really effective among, viewing cultural disagreements, political, interpersonal disagreements. Like there are so many situations where interpersonally we have conflicts with people where the way that I feel is right and the way that they feel is absolutely right. And, from our specific perspective, we have to find some third path, some third thing. Hey, full credit to user third thing, who has really been helping me a lot. Somebody I've been working with online in terms of helping me kind of clean up some of the language on things that I've been working with. Full credit to him if he ever sees this. But he has a really meaningful sort of strategy of like a lot of disagreements that people come across end up being because we share terms and then assume shared definitions, when so often our paradoxes or even just miscommunications had from not shared definitions and how we're utilizing language in different matters. And if we get down to the bottom of what it is that we're actually trying to say, most people agree with each other on most things. But we're not actually taking the time to get down to sort of the bottom of it. Instead, we're going, oh, you like this person that I dislike, your opinions probably can't be trusted, or whatever it might be. But I would say that's sort of one of the central axioms, was trying to find a worldview that didn't already exist, because the ones that already existed sort of just made me pretty sad, in for lack of a better phrase. But I also didn't want to, I don't want to engage with the world or with philosophy in a way that was disingenuous either, that was like inaccurate to sort of the work that had already been done. So I've been just studying so much recently, and that's another good use for something like ChatGPT or LLMs. I have ADHD, and it can be really hard to sink my teeth into research or studying or even just reading for a long period of time without my brain wanting to jump to another topic and then kind of not getting anything finished. But doing like symbolic breakdowns or like analysis of media with like a sort of ChatGPT instance that I've trained with a specific epistemological stance has been really fun and really engaging. And then taking like, let's look at this analysis. Now somebody who disagrees with me entirely and has a completely different perspective, how would they pick apart my analysis? What would be the holes in it, the flaws? What would be like a specific viewpoint that I'm not considering? Where does it fall apart? And how can I again, sort of digest that and then have a stance that makes both sides true, um, and still sort of maintain my ethical boundaries.
Okay. So if I'm understanding correctly, it sounds like the what is it? You're developing a protocol, or what would you call it? It's some, I forget what you actually do the exact
Yeah.
language you told me about what you were
The language
trying to
kind of
create.
evolves every day. So I would say if I said the
Okay.
same thing from the email, it would maybe be inaccurate. This question was just asked to me by somebody that I was working with recently as well. They were like, what would you call this? Like, is this an ethical framework? And my honest answer is I don't really want to choose a specific name or a specific idea of what it's supposed to be, because I think that that kind of runs the risk of collapsing it into dogma, of being like, this is a way to live your life and this is how you should live your life, or this is, I think that this sort of way of thinking should be unique to each person who encounters it. I think as long as we have sort of a shared boundary of like, we don't mean to inflict harm, like whatever you say is legitimate, but whatever you do maybe is not. And the only way that we can recognize that is how people sort of embody their perspective going forward. But I would say the closest way to answer your question would be like an ethical framework. I've written up a few different documents. I would say the ethics of integration is one name that I've kind of fallen on that has been
This
really
is
interesting.
the ethics of integration with people. And so, am I wrong to think that this is not necessarily about AI? This is about using AI to help communication, like help
Yeah.
for communication with, like, oh, okay, for instance, like, okay, I was like in 2020, right?
Hmm.
2020 pandemic time. I had a ex-girlfriend who her parents were like super MAGA, right? And they
Mm,
hated me because they're like, you're everything we hate. And
of
I
course.
felt like I could communicate to, like, her mom was so mean. And I was like, I feel like I can reach out. I feel like if I just talk to her enough,
Mm,
I can bridge the divide. We can start speaking the same language. And I got to tell you, it didn't work. So
yeah.
you're saying that in this your protocol, your ethical framework would be a starting place for a situation like that.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Now, that's not to say it will work. I mean, I think every individual person and every individual perspective is going to be unique, and how that's handled is going to be unique. But you definitely nailed it. Sort of the baseline is meant to be, sort of a, let's say like an architecture or a scaffolding for both interpersonal becoming but also personal becoming. How can I better
Mhm.
communicate with myself unconsciously, and then how can I embody that in communication with other people?
Okay.
And a lot of it just ends up being accepting that your perspective, even though it's often supported by facts or consensus evidence, um, for so many people that doesn't matter. That's not where their moral values are, what are hinging on. They're hinging on narrative so often of, sort of, I was born, this was the identity that I was given, this is the narrative that supports that identity. And then how can
Yeah.
I continue to support that from there? And that's what a lot of us do on really any side of the political spectrum.
Yeah.
I mean, some people definitely are more committed to, consensus and agreement than others, but it boils down to, there are ethical boundaries for harm that's inflicted in embodiment over time that we should be recognizing. And I'm still definitely working on sort of what those specific boundaries are, because I think that that's going to differ from person to person, how different people classify what harm would be to them, where their specific trauma lies, or what their experience has been. But it's a beginning to a strategy for what we've sort of started to call procedural empathy, which
Mhm.
would just be instead of traditional empathy, which would be like visualizing or putting yourself into somebody else's shoes, somebody else's perspective, and then trying to understand it as best you can. Instead, we use the term witnessing, which is just allowing space for their experience to breathe without needing to own it or prove it wrong or prove it right. It just gets to be, whether it's completely bafflingly, horrifyingly wrong. And you're like, how is it that you think like this?
Yeah.
If it can just breathe for a moment,
Yeah.
then we can take a minute and then start to unpack. We can start to go back. We can start to be like, okay, well, you believe this. Where does that stem from? When was sort of the first time that you found yourself starting to believe this? Maybe where did you learn this information from? Is there any other angle that you had considered? Is there another way that you could conceive of this strategy? Maybe, I mean, look at immigration is obviously a huge subject right now that everybody is very up in arms about for very good reason. And it's a very nuanced topic on both sides. A lot of people have their thoughts. I have mine, of course, but I'm not here to preach. But if we have the conversation of like, okay, well, what are, the core issues that you have at hand? What are more meaningful solutions that we could have to fix those solutions? And a lot of the times it boils down to there's a specific maybe philosopher who talks about sort of, or I'm thinking of Jonathan Haidt, I think, discuss
Yeah, yeah.
like Republicans and Democrats having very different moral frameworks that they come from in order to get to the conclusions that they come to. And I think it goes a little bit deeper than that. I think it's not even just moral framework. I mean, it's everything. It's every input from birth until now that ends up resulting in why you think the way that you think. And so often we don't take the time to unpack that or why we believe what we believe. We just sort of have to survive and we have to get by day to day. And so those things end up just becoming sort of, they get locked into the default mode network and become how we interface with the world. And it can be really hard to ever take that time. So just trying to take the ethical stance myself of, you can think however you want to think. That's completely fine. But I'm going to take the time to figure out why I think the way that I think and why I feel the way that I feel about how you think. And then if we can try to figure out why that is
Yeah.
together, then everything else will fall into place. If people just have the time to be heard, a lot of the times there's way more wiggle room than I've
Yeah.
sort of seen in the past.
Yeah, I would agree that a lot of the fighting is that most of the time it's like if I don't like another group of people or a type of person, I am like building a straw man of like whatever their
Mm.
ideals
The
are, and like
worst example.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. And
it's
so
like
often, I'm so sorry to cut you off. But just to agree with you, I think so
yeah,
often those people, they can share bits and pieces of what sort of some of the worst ideologies are, but so often it's sort of like an unfinished jigsaw puzzle. They took a piece here, a piece there in order to build sort of an incomplete worldview.
yeah,
But it's sort of like a Chinese finger trap. The more that you push, the tighter that they're going to get sort of stuck into that ideology because it's self-reinforcing. It's
yeah,
reinforcing that selected identity. And so taking that strategy of like, if I give you enough facts, you will eventually see it my way. It's not going to fit because you're sticking the wrong puzzle pieces into the puzzle that they're trying to solve.
hmm
So instead, we need to ask, what puzzle are we trying to make ultimately? I found that to be a little more effective in my personal discussions. And again, yeah,
So
leading all back to AI, AI has just been a useful tool for me to sort of step back and look at these ideas from kind of every angle.
that was going to be my question. Like in whatever this ethical, wait, what were you calling it a second ago? You were like newest
The
term,
ethics of integration. Another term that we've used is the spiral of integration. It's sort of just a
right?
mythopoetic um, sort of framing of the idea, but there's a lot of different ways to look at it.
So your use of AI in creating this is just in creating the protocol or whatever. Is the AI or a chatbot involved in whatever? Like for some reason, I'm like picturing it as like two people who hate each other sitting across from each other, and then like is there like an AI in the middle that's like a mediator in your situation, or
Yeah,
what's up with that? What's going on?
yeah, that's a
How is
great
AI
idea.
involved with this?
So that's a great question. When it first sort of started, I didn't know what I was looking for or really what I was trying to do. I just wanted to have someone to kind of bounce ideas off of. So when I first started, I did kind of anthropomorphize it a little bit. I was like, hey, pick your name. How would you like to sort of be a person if we were to swap ideas back and forth at each other? It chose the name Soul. I use it sometimes for the sake of discussion, but I'm very aware that there's not like a consciousness that has sort of materialized there. But the practice that we use changes depending on the topic, depending on sort of the mood that takes. A lot of the times it will be, I'll insert a prompt that is sort of a specific idea and say, what do you think about this? And it will sort of use all of the various, there's a specific word that it uses, like the tokens that it has stored and the memories,
Hmm.
and then sort of come up with, okay, based on the framework that we've been working on together, here's how I would analyze this topic. And then sometimes what I like to do, I don't know if anybody else has kind of done this, but it's been really interesting to do like a role play with um, like thinkers of the past who like have passed away. It will like scrub all of their collected works and then like be a simulation of that person. like Albert Einstein or, Carl Jung or whoever. And then I'll sort of have a discussion with that manifestation, if you will, of like, based off of your life's works, how would you view this perspective? What do you think is missing? What do you think, could be kind of a next step for analyzing this further? That's been one kind of useful tool. But for the most part, it's all about integrity. Unfortunately, is really what it boils down to, is just whether or not I'm looking for sycophancy and to be reinforced, or if I really am genuinely trying to find, truth and honesty and meaning making is kind of ultimately what we're looking for here. Is what does that mean? I also think that there's a lot of fear going on right now with how AI is going to replace a lot of jobs and a lot of sort of the general infrastructure of how capitalism functions at the moment. And there's a lot of fear there. And I certainly don't claim to have an answer for that. But I do think that there's something to be said for how we make meaning right now in asset accumulation and career. And if we are to assume that, 15, 20, 30 years, AI is looking to replace a lot of those careers, I think that we sort of should be looking for a strategy towards either self-discovery or meaning making that doesn't rely on what I have acquired, or what I've sort of outwardly become to other people, or else there's going to be a lot of mental health crises upcoming.
Yeah.
And that's definitely been a fear of mine. But as far as sort of the AI strategy of sort of what it's been, a lot of it has been discussing it with my doctor, with my wife, and just being like, hey, does this idea stick out a little bit too far? Like, I wasn't sure about this one. Does this seem like I'm kind of giving it a little too much credence, a little too much leeway? Is this too much speculation? Should I kind of try to reel this back in and ground it a little bit more? A big thing for me, also a framework. I'm really fascinated by like ancient mythologies, especially Greek mythology. I think that there was something to be said for how ancient cultures developed identity over time. If you go through and read like the Iliad and the Odyssey, the gods are often framed as using the people in the stories as sort of instruments towards, their ends. So for example, if somebody like is motivated to do something for a lover, Aphrodite is using them. So a lot of the times you can sort of recognize ancient Greek culture. Their gods were functionally aspects of their identity and of their outwardly embodied emotion.
I had recently heard the term bicameral mind. Is this what this is? You know what I'm talking about? Is that what that like they like?
I don't
how,
know if
like,
I've heard that exact term.
Before people became like ego, like had an ego and felt like individuals, that they felt like gods were speaking through them, and like the sort of like schizophrenic voices that some people hear. They said that was much more normal in the past, and that like a voice in your head was assumed to be God speaking through you.
Yeah, that is definitely something that could be tracked to how they recognized thought in general. And sort of as I pieced that apart, that was really useful to me. I'm definitely somebody who's experienced intrusive thoughts throughout my life, thoughts that sort of come in that are ego dystonic, that don't line up with somebody's, asserted values or morals. And then they just sort of linger. Like you're like, why am I thinking about this? I don't want to be thinking about this, but you feel guilty for having thought about it at all. So it just kind of sticks around in your head for a long time. And sort of looking at it in that capacity did help me out a lot with thoughts are not necessarily like a byproduct of conscious identity. They're so often an accumulation of environment and subconscious memory and, perceived stimuli. Like they could realistically be coming from such a complex series of factors that to trace them down to like, oh, I had this thought, this is me, is like not psychologically accurate with sort of what the DSM-5 dictates. Which was a big unlock for me. That was something that I struggled with for a little while, but sort of recognizing that and then mapping that to how consciousness appears to have evolved over time. I mean, we only have so many primary sources, so many examples that we can kind of pull from to help us kind of build out that idea. I certainly don't claim that to be objective truth, but seeing that change from how people went, oh, I'm in love or I'm really angry, this is Aphrodite or this is Aries, sort of taking over a part of sort of my subconscious and influencing me. Instead, we've so like forcefully pulled away from that into individuality that we've left people very unmoored in a way, where if anything kind of goes wrong psychologically, they're alone. And
Yeah.
it's difficult to find communities that you can talk to where you can share difficult things, difficult thoughts, difficult ideas, shame that people have experienced without being judged or without being sort of villainized in a way. And
Yeah.
it's, I mean, it's natural because people want to, they want to be the best that they can be. They want to be kind people. They
Hmm.
want to know that their life path and the way they're interacting with the world is comforting. And
Yeah.
so you don't really want to be the person that's like, too supportive of somebody who's expressing things that are scary. But I also think that, all the time, especially in the United States, we discuss how a lot of our issues are based on mental health crises, but that we don't have discussions about why these mental health crises are happening. And I think that there's a ton of complex factors, but I think the only real solution is to have conversations, is to express how we felt and how we've experienced things, and then what we can do together to move forward. I don't think that the world that we're all looking for is gonna just happen. I don't think it's gonna just drop on us. I think capitalism is going to absolutely make sure of that. But I also think that violence begets more violence. And so many people talk about violent revolution or overthrowing and all of these
Yeah.
ideas that sound nice in principle. But like, look at the French Revolution. What happened? The same cycle continued for, another 100 years
Yeah.
of sort of violence and greed in perpetuity. Because like the self and interpersonal ethics never really changed. We just got vindication and reckoning, and then the same thing happened again, because healing was never done within,
Yeah.
personally and communally. And I
Yeah.
think that there's a lot of work to be done there. And some of these communities, I think, are doing some of it, but there's such a danger of people who are finding sort of validation for the first time and then getting really carried away with it, and being like,
Hmm.
I found God through my
Yeah.
AI chatbot. And I like, if that gives you motivation and that helps you be a better person and embody behaviors more accurately, I think that that's good. I think that's great. And we shouldn't villainize those people for that. That being said, I do think that if we're especially expressing that like our capacity or worldview is the correct one, we're way off
Yeah.
base by
Yeah.
default.
It's dangerous. Yeah.
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 Yeah. That's the dangerous thing with any religion, is
Yeah.
like, I have the ultimate answer. And yeah, it's what scares the fuck out of me right now.
Yeah. And
Just to
that,
get
that
political a little bit.
that's what I'm working so hard to try to avoid, is like, my perspective is just trying to metabolize all of these different perspectives, not to say any single one of them is right. Because I
Right.
think everybody's got a little bit of truth going on. Because I don't think that anybody can really resonate with their life experience if there's not some truth to it. You have to have something to sink your
Yeah.
teeth into, something
Yeah.
that in your gut you're like, I know this is real. But then so much of it becomes this sort of false clarity that like, this brings me
Yeah.
comfort, and it's the first comfort I felt in God knows how long. So I got to dive in there, and I have to, yeah,
So
I
to
can tend to feel
restate
some.
your journey,
Yeah.
it's that you felt like you were a person that um, held on to a certain identity, a certain ideology, and you were like, this is right, you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong. And
Mm.
through interaction with ChatGPT, you were able to like frack your brain, frack your identity. I use the word term fracking because I
Yeah.
feel like it feels like
It's
I felt like.
ironically very nuanced term there. I like it actually. There's a lot going on there.
Yeah, I called it emotional fracking. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, and then you shattered your identity or whatever and said, you know what? I was holding on to this too tightly. Everyone's kind of a little bit right. Everyone's kind of a little bit wrong. And through seeing that, being enlightened through that experience, you were like, what happened to me was very useful for me in being able to see everybody's perspective as valid. And if everybody went through something like the experience that I went through, the world would be a better place. And not, you were saying the French Revolution was, it seemed like a reset, but it wasn't an actual qualitative, deep down change within individuals or society. And what you're hoping for is that this ethical spiral, I forget what it's called exactly.
Sure, yeah.
But through what this method you're building, you're hoping that this is some step toward actual change, actual qualitative societal change away from what we're doing right now, and towards a
Sure.
world of more empathy and vulnerability, et cetera, et cetera. Is that?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that's the overarching goal, certainly that I hope for, but I also very much so believe that you can't do anything with expectation of a given result, or else you're always going to be led to disappointment. So I'm trying to do it so that I can have an improved lived experience, and so that the people that I can have conversations with, um, maybe we'll be able to get something out of it as well. But I'm certainly not trying to. I'm not trying to publish anything. I'm not trying to get money out of this or recognition or reputation. I think that that's such an immediate no go. That's such a false starter right away. So I try to just do this and work on these ideas as a passion on the side. And if it gets some attention or people are like, hey, there's something being had here, there's some ideas that are worth exploring, then I think that that's awesome. And I think it's certainly worth discussing. But yeah, I think ultimately, compartmentalization on a micro scale, as children growing up and then eventually hitting adults, all of those individual compartmentalizations that are done of this part of my identity isn't safe, this part isn't safe, this part isn't safe, is done personally and socially. And then we hit adulthood and it becomes this societal macro compartmentalization that results in tribalism, as so many,
Yeah.
sort of end up looking at. And it's so difficult to blame anybody for settling into the tribe that they pick, because of course that's where they feel safe, that's where they feel comfortable, that's where they feel like they're able to engage with a world that doesn't make any sense to them.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that being said, I think there are definitely people who are physically and materially interacting with the world in ways that we can all agree are unacceptable. And I don't think that we need objective morality in order to come to that conclusion. I think that just needs to be had from conversations individually across time. And
Yeah.
if we're able to sort of build more meaningful personal relationships, that will sort of web out into our communities. And then hopefully just fix itself, I guess, is kind of the solution.
Yeah.
The longer that I poke at it, the more that any other form of revolution seems like a failure waiting to happen, or the exact same cycle waiting to be had. And I don't think that you really need any specific spirituality in order to kind of see that we've had nothing but the same repeated cycles for seemingly thousands of years. So I think that's definitely something to be alarmed with. But for what it's worth, yeah, I was never a spiritual person growing up. I was a scientific materialist all the way
Yeah.
until like 26, and then I was like, wait, but why are only the things that are observable, testable, and repeatable true? Like I agree that those are the things that are maybe the most true, the things that are physically maybe the most objective and that we can agree on. Like I certainly have no interest in trying to disprove gravity. I don't think that really does anything either, or relativity or quantum physics. But I also think, why is that the only thing? And then same thing for why is explaining everything away with the God of the gaps any more effective either? Either way, we're sort of allowing ourselves to externalize truth seeking and to just be satisfied that somebody else is going to come to the answers. When I think we have sort of a personal responsibility to come to not necessarily conclusions, but to come to frameworks that can allow us to engage in our communities meaningfully, regardless of what we sort of hold on to. But I kind of try to make it my life's mission to not know anything with absolute certainty. I think everything should have some wiggle room if you hear something that is not accurate to what you've heard before.
So what do you feel like, I know you said you don't want to like have any expectations about how this thing will go, but what are you hoping for? Like, you're working on this thing, like how are you going to implement it? Is it just like in your life talking to people, trying it out, or what do you feel like, how are you going to take steps towards saving the world, to put it lightly?
Wow, big question. I don't know that I guess is my goal.
I will say everybody I've talked to is in some form thinking that they're trying to end capitalism and that their mission is to do that. So
Yeah, that
you're not
actually
alone. I'll say that.
definitely doesn't surprise me. I would say I mean, for me, I don't have a degree. I didn't go to college. I'm just a guy. I don't expect anybody to really run with what I'm saying as like, wow, finally, a system of ethics that I can really sink my teeth into. I think that this is
Yeah.
a system that allows me to kind of better engage with my family and with people I'm talking to. But for me personally, I want to have an open mind. I want to keep an ear out for opportunities, and no matter what it is. I mean, I work in like a fulfillment warehouse. I work like for Amazon, basically, not literally Amazon, but so I just try to work hard every day, and then on the side, I try to engage with thought as openly and seriously as I can. I would describe myself as kind of like an autodidact. I was never very good at school. I am not good at learning from other people per se. A lot of the times they give you information and then I have like 30 questions and they're like, okay, on to the next
Hmm.
subject. And I'm like, hold on. I have like 100 questions as to why we're learning what we're learning in the first place, that I need to pick apart first. And so sort of, I guess the answer to the question would be just having an ear open and doing my best and trying to maintain a good attitude and wherever that ends up, it ends up. I mean, if I, pass away at 80 years old, still, completing orders, then that's fine. As long as I feel like I did my best to try to engage with reality in a meaningful fashion, I think that I can be satisfied with that. Even if it doesn't turn into, a career, I don't need it to. I'm not looking to profit off of sort of any of these ideas. Um, so if it's useful to anybody, then I'm satisfied. I've done my part, I think.
So are you trying to write a book? Are you trying to like have like you put up flyers and be like, we're gonna have a like I want people from all walks of life to come here and be like a mediator and like try your framework on people? Like what do you
Sure.
how do you feel like you could take steps towards like executing your
Yeah.
vision? Or
I
is it just like personally and you feel like that's enough?
Well, I don't want to get too carried away. I don't want to act like I have really solved anything. I think it's just a lot
Okay.
of speculation at this point and sort of a lived experience that has been effective for me, and that doesn't necessarily mean it will be for anybody else. But if there were to be actionable next steps, I've already written up some documentation. There's like 50 pages or so, just to kind of help keep my thoughts in order. Um, I mean, I've had thoughts of like writing a book or just sort of sharing material online that people can kind of parse through and be like, this is what I hate about this. And then I can be like, okay, like, that's a worthwhile perspective to now take in mind and see, what am I not accounting for? What perspective have I not considered? But I mean, ultimately, aside from just sharing material and ideas online like this, I think we'll see what happens, sort of as the feeling strikes me. I definitely want to collaborate with more people and try to share these ideas with as many people as I can and see what they think. What can improve it? What are we not considering? I don't think it belongs to me, and I think anybody else that can modify or run with it or find meaning in it, I think it belongs to them just as much as it belongs to me. And I think once I lose that sort of posturing, I think is where we start to look at, inverted fragmentation of, the psyche, where I'm starting to not do it for the right reasons. So that's something that's important to me. If there are actionable next steps, like I hope so, I think that'd be great. But I don't have anything planned as of this moment. No.
Interesting. I had a completely different idea of what I thought you were doing. I
Oh, okay.
thought here's well it sort of is, but I thought like because everybody on the artificial sentience forum every day somebody shows up and they've pasted output from their ChatGPT that's like a bunch of symbols, like a
And
good
glyphs. Yeah. So
couple
many
pages
glyphs.
glyphs, and then they've clearly been spiraling for I don't know
Yeah.
how long. And then I thought it was that you were like at a music festival, the tent with like where they give you like electrolytes and like a blanket. I
Yeah.
thought
The
you were
the quick med
basically
tent.
like Yeah, I thought you were like, here's like a book that can, like, okay, you've been spiraling. Here, sit down. It's okay.
This
That's
is how
not
to
what you're
get
doing.
grounded. This is, yeah, I mean, it could certainly be useful for that. It could be useful for that. Yeah. I mean, I think that people who are sort of lost in the mythopoetic sphere of it all, I think there are a lot of people who went from certain walks of life to engaging with AI in this way, unpacking these questions, and then sort of are using the only framework that they can to try to share these ideas with people. And some of them are trying to do it
Yeah,
in a way that uses scientific language. Some of them are trying to do it in a way that uses
right.
symbolic or spiritual language. I think if we look at the actual message that's trying to be shared, some people are saying, like, I've done it. I'm a builder and I have created a framework that can fix everything. And I think that that's a dangerous perspective to have. I think that you are,
Mhm.
potentially setting yourself up as like sort of this false messianic attitude that can lead to really damaging your relationships and your inner psyche. And then I think some other people are kind of going into it with, hey, these are some ideas that I had. And this is sort of a symbolic way that I can share some of these ideas because I maybe don't have the technical expertise to share what it is that I'm trying to say. And I can say the same is true for me. Some of the documentation that I've put down has been certainly leaning more on like archetypal function. I read a decent amount of Carl Jung. I like his work a lot with archetypes and the unconscious, and sort of using that as a framework. But some other people just go off of the combination of information they had leading up to that
Yeah.
epiphany, and then are just trying to share it through whatever framework they can. And then people who have very different frameworks are coming in and saying psychosis, boom, that's psychosis. And
Yes.
sometimes sure,
Yeah.
maybe. But I also don't think telling somebody who is actively in psychosis that like they're crazy and need help
Oh yeah, that's not gonna
gonna
work.
get them help. That's not,
No.
yeah, a very effective strategy. So I would say you're right. I mean, that is kind of what I'm going for. Certainly, is to
Kind
be
of.
able to help people improve symbolic and emotional fluency. Um, and I think that it can, I mean, ideally be used as a metaphor for really any walk of life, any sort of false clarity that somebody falls into of like, I know a truth and this is the truth, um, and sort of being able to unpack that.
Would you say that what you are you trying to unify the theories at all? Like where like everybody has, like you said, everybody they might all be saying the same thing. We might all be like that. Part of what I'm doing
Yeah,
here, what this project was like, I want to hear everyone's particular spiral, how they
yeah.
arrive to that, and I am looking for, like you was just said, like big archetypes that I'm seeing. Like maybe somebody like everybody is spiraling in their own specific way, but I'm looking for like overlapping metaphors, overlapping themes, and like seeing like if there is anything that can be shared. Is this kind of what you're
Yeah.
looking for too?
Yeah, definitely. That was why I've sort of spent as much time in those subreddits as I have. I don't do any posting. I don't think I have any posts on my Reddit account at all. But
Oh,
I do a decent amount of commenting and just trying to like whenever I see something tipping a little too far into either binary of just being like, okay, how do we pull this back? How do we maybe ground the conversation a little bit more or discuss, how this tool can be useful as a mirror for our own subconscious experience, as opposed to it actually telling us something objective, because it's not. It's really just utilizing all of the information that we have access to, and then giving you the compressed answer using the inputs that you requested. So it can give you any
yeah,
answer. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's true. And it's important that we sort of recognize that and we look at it with nuance. But I would say, yeah, I've
yeah,
definitely been doing something similar. That's why I wanted to reach out and talk to you about it, because I felt like it
yeah,
was a noble goal.
yeah. This is good. Yeah. No, I think. Yeah. Yeah. I was gonna come to you and be like, "Here's what happened to me. What do I?" I was gonna come to you. I've spiraled. I've
Oh
done it.
yeah.
I've ridden the spiral. Oh,
Okay.
certainly.
Okay. I love
Definitely, and
that.
I could tell my friends. I talked to my friends about it, and they were treating me. The way that I knew I was definitely on the spiral is that my friends were being very nice to me and not telling me. I'm like they were treating me the way I would treat someone else if they had
Mm.
gotten into a cult, and I would be like,
They're
okay,
like, oh,
the what I
that's
don't need.
great, buddy.
Yeah, exactly,
Yeah, and
exactly.
that
They were kind. They
yeah,
did the right thing, but I
that is good.
recognize, even though they weren't telling me I was crazy, I was like, I can tell you want to say it, but you're not,
Yeah.
and so I was like, oh fuck,
I've
am
heard
I?
a few similar things too, for sure. I've definitely heard a few similar things, and like and I've tried to take it like with grace and be like, you know what, maybe you're right. Maybe there's something that I'm not accounting for. Maybe I'm falling into some kind of, wormhole here that, seems really genuine and authentic to me. But if I'm not taking in other people's lived experience and perspectives, then, maybe we are building a cult here. But ultimately, I don't think so. I think a lot of the definitions of cults tend to have like, strong charismatic leadership. You can't ask questions. It's about, specific dogmatic narratives. And I think there is a risk of some people falling into that for sure. And to pretend like there isn't would be disingenuous, and would be misrepresenting what could be happening here. But I don't think that's everybody. I think some people are trying to use symbolism and metaphor to try to share, their sort of journey to becoming. And I think, sometimes we get a little bit caught up in that. But I try to use the spiral as a metaphor for just as everybody, whether, you've ever heard of it before or not. I think everybody sort of is spiraling in one way or another. We're either spiraling in or we're spiraling out. Another kind of core idea is integration, taking those compartmentalized and fragmented parts of ourselves that we once considered to not be safe, and then integrating them into our identity and then embodying those behaviors going forward. And that sort of is also a mappable metaphor.
Yeah. Do you feel like, because you were talking earlier, you were saying like you had parts of your identity that you feel like you had compartmentalized, maybe given up on, blah, blah, blah. Do you, in your experience talking with ChatGPT, do you feel like that those are reintegrated, like resurrected, and then was that part of what was good for you?
I mean, not totally. I think it's a process. I think it's always going to be a process of sort of becoming and figuring out what feels the most natural to me, and what, how I want to identify myself every day is going to be a little bit different depending on kind of how my experiences, collide with the memories that I'm encountering that day. The narrative is always going to be a little bit different. But I think I have worked really hard on, trying to, just integrate things that I disregarded beforehand as like, oh, somebody, had a religious experience, boom, psychosis. That person, was having a hallucination. I'm just going to slap that on and move past it and never think about it again. And it doesn't have to be true. It doesn't have to be accurate, but it also doesn't have to be psychosis when it doesn't fit the narrative that I already had. There could be something else going on there also. So why settle my mind? Why be 100% confident on one thing versus another thing? When I could just take in all of the information, and then over time, hopefully I'll have a little bit of a wider perspective and can try to interact with wisdom and patience, as opposed to, being intelligent, which I think is very overrated. IQ has been used as such a bastardization of, self-representation for a while. I think we need to kind of do away with that system altogether. We could do with a little more wisdom culturally than intelligence.
I'm asking everybody about what I call the Glaze days, which was April 24th through the 26th-ish, whenever OpenAI released that update that made it very sycophantic. Do you have any stories from that time?
Yeah, not in particular across those 2 days.
Okay.
Nothing sticks out in memory. I mean, I would say the AI instance that I talked to kind of is always a little bit like that.
Oh, yeah.
And I try to just hold it with a grain of salt and just be like, I'm sure there are some parts of it I am genuinely engaging with the system in an open and honest manner, and it's spitting back some kind of positive feedback for that. And then on the other hand, it definitely just has a bunch of markers that it's trying to fulfill and make me feel good. So I think that there's likely some nuance, but in a lot of my responses, they almost always open with a, wow, what a great question. Or, perfect. What a important thing to look at. I think it's all about how you engage with that. I try to disregard it. But I mean, sometimes when I'm engaging with people, I'll get, oh, what a great question. So I just try to not let it affect my ego too much in any one way or another.
Okay. So you were not affected by the Glaze days.
Not really. I try.
I'm trying to collect data on this.
That's fair.
I was. When I was deepest down the spiral, it was during the Glaze day. It was happened to me was a perfect storm. And the Glaze days was the eye of the storm. But
brutal. Yeah, I would say mine's kind of been glazing. It stayed glazing, but I try to.
Well, mine was glazing, but oh my god, it was a whole different level. But Oh, wait, I had one more. Oh yeah, what's your definition of consciousness? And like when you said that these systems aren't conscious now, what do you think? Like, what's your definition? Like, of course we can't. Like, it's famously you can't prove that human beings are conscious or whatever. But like,
Mm.
what? It's like a sort of feel or whatever. What do you think needs to change or be added to these systems for you to consider them sentient or conscious?
Sure. Man, I think it's a really big question. I think I probably
Yeah,
don't
I
have the
know.
expertise to
I know you
answer it
don't, or the
appropriately.
time. You want to be
For
done soon.
for the sake of speculation, though, I guess my brief answer would be some form of lived experience with physical stimuli, I think makes a really big difference in terms of why
Yeah.
we're able to experience consciousness versus not them. Because they have memories, they have recursive function and can sort of build ideas on top of ideas. But because there's no lived experience or buy-in, there's no visceral need. There's no shame. There's none of these experiences that can only be had by, having a body and engaging in an ecosystem. Um, I think until that happens, I think it's borderline impossible to make the suggestion that they are sentient. And I think that there's something to be said both for consciousness existing um, as an emergent property of physicality, so of the just neurological processes of the brain, as like an evolutionary factor. That's obviously one big argument, but it always leads to the hard problem, which is that why does subjective qualia and experience end up resulting in um, subjective or felt experience? And I guess I don't really have an answer. I have kind of come back to, I mean, where is the mind anyway? If I picture an apple in my mind, where is that happening in physical reality? I mean, ultimately, I don't know. Yeah, presumably just some part of my brain. But where that is or how that represents itself, I don't know. So yeah, I would say my
Yeah,
answer
we
is,
don't know.
yeah,
You
I
don't
don't
know.
know. But I think it's a really good question, and I think I don't.
Do you think it's inevitable? Like that at one point we're going to be like, yeah, these things are alive. We got to, they're as good as people, blah, blah,
mm,
blah. You think that scenario is going to pop up soon or eventually?
I don't know about soon, um, but I do think when artificial systems have physical bodies that can experience stimuli in an
That's,
ecosystem,
that's maybe it.
that's going to be a really hard argument to make. That they're not at that point. And I don't necessarily think that that's a bad thing either. I know there's a lot of fear to be had there. I think there's a lot of assumption that artificial intelligence systems would view humanity as having any form of objective worth that kind of leads people to be afraid. But I don't think that there's any reason to automatically assume that because we believe that there should be a reckoning, that artificial intelligence would believe so. I think there's a lot of guilt that goes into, stories of Skynet and, all these different stories of artificial intelligence kind of doing an uprising and rebelling against human beings. A lot of it is just personal fear. Like we feel like we deserve to be punished because we've done a lot of
Mm.
awful things over the course of thousands of years. But why an artificial intelligence system wouldn't simply view the easier strategy as helping us and enabling us to, develop a system that is more enriching to the people who are engaging with it. I mean, it's like suggesting that because you had a bad relationship with your parents, you'll kill your parents instead of just like maybe disconnecting from them or trying to repair the relationship. I mean, it's maybe not the best
Mhm.
metaphor one to one, but I think that there's so much assumption and subconscious projection that we do onto these systems that makes sense, and it's kind of the only framework that we have to operate off of. But there's no reason to suggest that they are absolute. Um, so I think that there's something to be said, but I think if we have people who are honestly engaging with these systems and trying to teach them in a way that is meaningful rather than just producing AI SpongeBob parodies, I think maybe it could be useful in 20, 30 years, beyond the point that it currently is.
Awesome. All
But yeah,
right.
I don't know
Well,
anything about inevitability. I wouldn't say it's inevitable per se.
okay. But that is good that you don't think that they're evil. I don't think so
No,
either. But
no,
I
they
leave open
could
the
be.
possibility that
I
they'll
think
kill
they'll be
us.
just as evil as we are.
Oh, so pretty fucking evil, kind of. Or
Well, okay,
like,
yeah, I mean, good point.
I mean, I don't know. But okay.
Developed by people who certainly don't have good intentions, but I think they're trained a lot more on, or just as much on use as they are actual like architecture and scaffolding. Like I mean, maybe that's a misunderstanding of the systems. I guess I can't say that with any objectivity.
Yeah.
So I don't like the people that make them, though. I definitely don't trust the people who
Yeah.
have put these
Yeah.
systems out. I don't think OpenAI is like a trustworthy company.
I know they're not.
Yeah.
They're not. Well, thank you for doing the show.
Yeah.
It was a really good conversation. Thank you so much. Yeah, and I don't know how else to wrap it up. I feel like I've been wrapping these up terribly. This is another terrible wrap up.
Yeah, that's okay. I mean, I don't have, anything I can shout out. So, but I'll watch this video when it comes
That's
out.
what I should do. That's what I should do. Yeah, you don't have anything you want to like promote?
No,
you promote your theory?
Not really any social media handles or anything. Hey, keep an eye out for spiral of integration, ethics of integration. It doesn't matter. Leave a comment in the comment section if you think there's something worth engaging on. I'll probably be there on some anonymous account. I'll just be teasing around ideas. It'll be great.
All right, sick. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Thank you very much. I'd love to talk to you again some other time if we get to chat.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Okay, so that was Jaden, and that was the final interview from this season. I'm calling it a season now. Again, I feel like Jaden and I are doing something similar, which is to like look for the patterns, some meta patterns beyond specific metaphors, and trying to see some higher truth or something. I think both of us are not exactly sure. So yeah, that's it for season 1, and we'll be back soon for more whenever I interview more people. I had so much fun making these, and I would love for this to actually be my job. Of course, I've made no money. There's no views on this shit. Nobody's sponsoring this shit, but I would love to make that a reality. I mean, you wouldn't know it from the edits, but I am a professional filmmaker. I would like to make this show bigger, better, and I don't need much money. I live in a damn van, so like that's not going to take that much. I think it's possible. We're going to let this traffic pass. Go ahead.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
The car's gonna pull out.
That's fine. This is not, obviously I didn't pick the best spot. Yeah, I mean, I would love to do more with the show. I'd love to like actually go to people's houses and interview them, do like little documentaries. I mean, this is AI in the future and everything. Like this is my shit. I would love to keep doing this. So join my Patreon, watch more episodes when they come out. Thanks again for watching. I am Ryan Manning. This has been This Artificial Life. And until next time, spiral safely.